good evening. Welcome to another edition of World Today, your show on DD India, where it's your daily window to what's happening in the world. I am Anil Thomas, and on the show tonight, we'll get you the latest from the build-up to the COP26 summit in Glasgow. Also take a look at that coup in Sudan, what's happening there, and our focus in sports, the World T20, where Afghanistan has managed to get win number 1 under their belt. Lots to look forward to in the next 60 minutes. Let's get started with the headlines. A major win for India and other developing countries ahead of COP26 in Glasgow. 100 billion aid target by rich countries can be met in 2023, announced COP26 ministers. Australia says it will target net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The army takes reins of the government after deposing the interim government in Sudan. The interim government's council head, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, addresses the nation after the coup. Soldiers arrest most of the members of Sudan's cabinet, even as opponents of the takeover hit the streets, where gunfire and injuries have been reported. After 4 continuous years of extension, Egypt President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi announces the termination of nationwide state of emergency. The state of emergency granted authorities sweeping powers to make arrests and crack down on what they call enemies of the state. In World T20 cricket, Afghanistan beat Scotland by 130 runs at Sharjah Cricket Stadium. Well, those were the headlines at the top of this hour. Now for the stories in detail, how things are panning out. Sudan is in the midst of a crisis. The African country's capital is locked down after a coup triggered deadly unrest. At least 7 people were killed in the unrest triggered by the military takeover, which brought a halt to Sudan's transition to democracy 2 years after a popular uprising ended decades of authoritarian rule. Meanwhile, the UN mission to Sudan has issued an emphatic rebuke amid an apparent coup and said that the reported detentions of the Prime Minister and government officials are unacceptable.
These are the visuals of defiant protesters who chose to remain on the streets after the country's armed forces launched a military coup. People were chanting slogans while tires burned in the streets. They believe the military betrayed the civilians. Soldiers arrested most of the members of Sudan's cabinet and a large number of pro-government party leaders on Monday, according to sources.
They arrested the ministers, they detained members of the Sovereign Council. This is a full-fledged coup and we reject it completely. We have to go to the constitutional document. The government should be handed to civilians and you should free all those you detained and bring them back to their positions. Burhan should submit his resignation. His resignation is the streets' main demand. Has a unified opinion. A few years ago, people protested, even the government knows, and Burhan as well. A country is taken hostage for 52 years. It is impossible to allow the army to be back in power after the agreement reached. And the blood of the martyrs, and this is a promise for them. We made a promise to the martyrs.
Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok was put under house arrest after an unidentified military force besieged his house early on October 25, reportedly. A military force stormed the house of the Prime Minister's media advisor and arrested him early on Monday, according to family sources. Sudan's military seized power from a transitional government on Monday, and a health ministry official said 7 people were killed by gunfire and 140 injured in clashes between soldiers and street protesters. The leader of the takeover, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, dissolved the military-civilian Sovereign Council that had been established to guide the country to democracy following the overthrow of long-ruling autocrat Omar al-Bashir in a popular uprising 2 years ago. Burhan announced a state of emergency, saying the armed forces needed to protect safety and security. He promised to hold elections in July 2023 and hand over to an elected civilian government then. The US State Department said Washington does not have anything to share on Hamdok's whereabouts and condition. A department spokesman said it was pausing the $700 million in economic support for Sudan.
We recognize the legitimate grievances about the pace of the transition, but Sovereign Council Chair Burhan's dismissal of government officials and dissolution of government institutions both violate Sudan's constitutional declaration and abandon the democratic aspirations of the Sudanese people. Military officials should immediately release and ensure the safety of all detained political actors, fully restore the civilian-led transitional government, and refrain from any violence against protesters, including the use of live ammunition. Any change to the transitional government by force risks assistance in our bilateral relationship more broadly. In light of these developments, the United States is pausing assistance from the $700 million in emergency assistance appropriations of economic support funds for Sudan.
The coup has been condemned around the world. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate release of Sudan's Prime Minister and all other officials.
The Secretary General strongly condemns the ongoing military coup d'etat in Khartoum and all actions that could jeopardize Sudan's political transition and stability. The Secretary General calls for the immediate reconstitution of the governing arrangements provided under the constitutional document. The unlawful detention of the Prime Minister, government officials, and politicians is unacceptable and contravenes the constitutional document and the partnership critical for the success of Sudan's transition. The Secretary General calls on the immediate release of the Prime Minister and all others who have been detained immediately. Sudanese stakeholders must immediately return to dialogue and engage in good faith to restore the constitutional order and Sudan's transitional process. The United Nations reiterates its unwavering commitment and support to the realization of Sudan's political transition. Any attempt to undermine the transition process puts at risk Sudan's security, stability, and development. The United Nations will continue to stand with the people of Sudan as they strive to fulfill their aspirations for a peaceful, prosperous, and democratic future.
Britain has also said that the military coup in Sudan was an unacceptable betrayal of the Sudanese people.
The UK most strongly condemns the arrests of civilian members of Sudan's transitional government by the military. We are also deeply concerned by reports of shooting of protesters. This must stop. The acts of the military today represent an unacceptable betrayal of the Sudanese people and their journey to democracy.
Sudan has been on the edge since a failed coup plot last month unleashed bitter recriminations between military and civilian groups meant to be sharing power following the 2019 ouster of the former leader Omar al-Bashir. Bashir was toppled after months of street protests. A political transition agreed after his ouster was meant to lead to elections by the end of 2023. World Today Desk, DD India.
The European Union's drug regulator on Monday said that a booster dose of Moderna's coronavirus vaccine may be considered in people aged 18 years and above at least 6 months after the second dose. In a statement, the European Medicines Agency cited data showing that boosters given to people 6 to 8 months after their second dose led to an increase in antibody levels in adults whose levels were going down. Earlier this month, the EMA said booster doses of COVID-19 vaccine made by Pfizer-BioNTech could also be considered. While this is the second COVID-19 booster vaccine to be approved by in the European Union, however, the European Medicines Agency also said that the risk of inflammatory heart conditions or other rare side effects after the booster is being monitored. Meanwhile, millions of students are back to class in Venezuela after a long closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Children dressed in uniforms or of wearing face masks filled into schools in the capital Caracas, abiding with the new normal. Venezuela on Monday reopened its public schools and universities, which serve more than 11 million students. President Nicolas Maduro's government had delayed the restart of in-person classes several times amid new peaks in infections and vaccination delays. According to the government, around 8.7 million children would return to classrooms across the country, while some 3.1 million students would attend universities. The government said that 56% of the population have been vaccinated so far. However, those aged 12 and up in Venezuela are now eligible for their first dose of COVID-19 vaccine. Staying with vaccines, hundreds of New York City municipal employees marched across the Brooklyn Bridge against the COVID-19 vaccine mandate that is set to get into effect on October 29th. The demonstrators include city workers, police officers, firefighters, sanitation workers, paramedics and public school teachers. Holding signs that read "My body, my choice" and chanting "No vaccine mandate," the crowd marched from downtown Brooklyn to City Hall in Manhattan. This came in as the New York mayor ordered all city employees to show vaccination proof or be placed on unpaid leave. Setting a deadline of 5 p.m. till October 29th, the mayor also offered a $500 incentive to get vaccinated. While protesters vowed to defy the mandate, several unions are now demanding back pay for workers who already have got vaccinated without bonus. Well, now news from the COP26 summit in Glasgow. Well, as the world grapples with extreme weather events and climate change becomes the buzzword of contemporary times, many economic assessments of the climate crisis grossly undervalue the lives of young people and future generations. The Glasgow window could be now or never for the climate crisis. From United States to the European continent to Asia, the dangers of climate change are seen everywhere. United Nations has warned that the world is way off track to reach its goals for capping rising temperatures.
The world is battling climate crisis like never before. From east to west, several catastrophes have been wreaking havoc in many parts of the world. In the United States, California, a powerful storm referred to as a bomb cyclone, an atmospheric river, has hit northern California over the weekend, leaving behind massive destruction. Authorities are busy inspecting damage from the storm that triggered heavy rain, flooding, mudslides and power outages. According to the National Weather Service, at least 13 inches of rain dropped in some counties, while some witnessed as much as 8 inches of rain. In addition to being disruptive, the torrential rainfall was nothing short of record-breaking. Storms are ravaging Italy too. Fierce storms have triggered landslides in the southern part of the country, leaving roads and fields flooded. The Italian weather site said parts of Sicily and Calabria were slammed by a rare Mediterranean hurricane known as Medicane, with winds of up to 120 kilometers per hour. The strong hurricane prompted schools to be closed in a number of towns and cities, while dozens of flights were diverted from the area, with ferry links between the southern islands forced to be cancelled. Parts of Vietnam are also submerged underwater as prolonged heavy rains have triggered widespread flooding in several parts of central Vietnam. Amid this, people are forced to flee their homes. Visuals show people moving belongings and furniture out of their flooded homes in Quang Nam province. Adults are making makeshift rafts to move children and wade them through knee-deep floodwater. Authorities evacuated at least 4,500 people in Quang Nagai from flood-prone areas over the weekend. And this is not the end of the story. The United Nations has warned that the world is way off track to reach its goals of capping rising temperatures. The UN Weather Agency, World Meteorological Organization, has said in a report that greenhouse gas concentrations hit a new record in 2020. The WMO's Secretary General Petteri Talas said the current rate of increase in heat-trapping gases would result in temperature rises far in excess of the 2015 Paris Agreement target of 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average this century. Fortunately, climate change is one of the top agendas for the world leaders who are ready to meet for COP26 at the end of this month. A decade-old target of rich countries to contribute $100 billion a year to help poor countries fight climate change should be attainable in 2023, ministers said on Monday ahead of COP26. The target was meant to have been reached last year, and the failure of developed countries to do so has become a key point of contention heading into the summit starting next week in Glasgow. The UK government's COP26 president Alok Sharma has tasked the environment ministers of Canada and Germany to review pledges so far, and they pointed to a positive trend in a new report. The minister said analysis by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development showed significant progress towards the $100 billion goal in 2022 and provides confidence that it would be met in 2023. He stressed the work on helping poorer nations adapt to and mitigate for the worst impacts of climate change was far from complete. Climate change is a priority for India too. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be travelling to Rome, Italy and Glasgow, United Kingdom from the 29th of October to the 2nd of November 2021 to attend the 16th G20 Summit and the World Leaders Summit of COP26 respectively. The UNFCCC embodies the global will and vision to combat climate change. The periodic conferences of parties to this convention have emerged as global climate summits, providing an opportunity for stock-taking and for charting the way forward. Prime Minister last attended the COP21 in Paris in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was concluded and whose implementation commences this year. At COP26, the parties will work to achieve the completion of the Paris Agreement implementation guidelines, the mobilization of climate finance, action to strengthen climate adaptation, technology development and transfer, and keeping in reach the Paris Agreement goals of limiting the rise in global temperatures. Prime Minister will also hold numerous bilateral meetings on the sidelines of COP26, including with Prime Minister of UK Boris Johnson. Australia, long under fire as one of the world's top producers of coal and gas, said it will target net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but added it will not legislate the goal and instead rely on consumers and companies to drive emissions reductions. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said Australia, one of the world's largest emitters of greenhouse gases as per capita basis, will achieve the target largely through technology development, with the government investing Australian dollars 20 billion, around 15 billion US dollars. The investment will reduce the costs of technologies such as clean hydrogen and increase their use. COP26 conference in Glasgow aims to secure more ambitious climate action from the nearly 200 countries that signed the 2015 Paris Agreement and agreed to limit human-caused global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. World leaders from more than 200 member countries will meet in Glasgow under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to review the implementation of the convention and strengthen their commitments towards climate action. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, let's try and understand what exactly is happening in COP26, especially looking at that climate funding that's been a huge cause of concern. But slowly things very much coming in place before the COP26 rolls over the weekend this Sunday, starting with the next 12 days of deliberations from the weekend starting Sunday. Let's try and understand now. The world is getting warmer. Let's take a look at this particular picture. The annual mean and land and ocean temperature below an average that's been put. It's between 1850 and 2020. It's all been minus except for a minor blip that you would see somewhere between 1850 and 1900, and after that it's post 19. We do see some kind of blips there, it's in the minus where we've seen the temperatures falling, but overall if you see post say in the post 1970s, there's been a slight rise in the temperatures, and that's continued to the present day till 2020. So clearly this particular, the rise in temperature, that's been a cause of concern, and that continues to affect the world as the world is getting warmer and warmer with every passing day. Let's now also understand the highlights of climate finance. How exactly did it all begin? How exactly are we today? In 2009, at the 15th COP meeting in Copenhagen, this is where all the parties or all the people who were involved in Copenhagen decided that climate finance funding of $100 billion a year by 2020 was agreed. This was agreed in Copenhagen, and the finance is to fund this climate change mitigation both from private as well as public players, source it from many different faces. The finance part of it, especially getting those funds where it was measured in many times. It was measured to reduce the greenhouse emissions and also adaptation to climate change. This funding came from both sources, and they came in also in different forms, some in kind, some in terms of promises. Third, the 100 billion commitment were reiterated at the COP16 in Cancun in 2010 and also in Paris in 2015, where it was agreed to extend the commitments to provide 100 billion every year to 2025. Now, what's happened is that ensuring that 100 billion pledge is one of the goals, or is met going forward, and is one of the 4 goals of UK's COP26 presidency. So, it's a matter of concern for them, and they want to put it through. Let's now also understand purely in terms of what's happened, before COP26. This is how the things have been. Climate finance, the amount provided and mobilized by developed countries. This is in dollars. Look at it, 2013, 14, 15 in Cancun, 15 in Paris, they talked about 100 billion, but still the target not being reached there. 2023, the goal looks likely to be possible of hitting that 100 billion US dollar target. That's what all are hopeful about. This has happened before COP26 meeting, before the G20 summit meeting. So one of the sticky points, or one of the key themes of this particular edition of COP26 being addressed. By 2023, we are looking at 100 billion dollars, coming into the coffers of coffers when it comes to helping climate change. Now, how is it possible? The COP26 ministers, the target for rich countries to contribute 100 billion a year, attainable in the year 2023. This is something that's interesting, because they're not even looking at a 2022 target, but something more achievable, 2023, a target being set, especially when it comes to fighting climate change. It could be attained. That's clearly one of the big talking points, especially the targets. The second target that they have set in this particular meeting, the target was meant to have been reached last year, that's 2020. Remember, the COP26 was scheduled to take place last year, but it's now moved to 2021 this year. So clearly a year's delay, but clearly the failure of developed countries here. This target was supposed to be met last year. It's been pushed to another year, but then clearly one of the key points, before that next week summit in Glasgow, that's going to be soothing the nerves before the big leaders sit down to talk about climate change and the issues before them. The UK government's COP26 president Alok Sharma, had tasked the environment ministers of Canada and Germany especially to review their pledges so far, and they pointed to a positive trend, especially in a new report, and that's going to be one of the talking points, when these leaders meet in the G20 summit. The minister also said that, especially analyze the analysis by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, that's OECD, has showed significant progress towards that 100 billion promise that was set for 2022. The target for 2022 now, being shifted and would be met in the year 2023. So clearly some targets being set, but targets for good likely to be achieved in the year 2023. The work on helping the poor nations or poorer nations adapt and to mitigate for the worst impacts of climate change was far from complete, and there is a need especially to increase the sums available for climate adaptation, and steps must be taken urgently to improve the access to finance. But the big positive, if one looks at before G20, is that 100 billion US dollar promise that looks achievable at least for the year 2023 by the big superpowers. One final look on the impact, especially when one looks at the impact of high emissions of carbon dioxide. Australia today has come ahead and spoken about net zero, but Australia also has the highest emissions per person than many countries there. If you look at it from an Australia, US, China, EU also includes England or UK here along with India. If you see, developing countries are not much on the radar as compared to an Australia or a United States, or for that matter even China, when one looks at it purely on a scale when it comes to high emissions due to carbon dioxide. Well, let's now get a perspective on what exactly is happening, how things are moving, especially when it comes to COP26 and the big issue of finance there getting sorted out, climate finance getting sorted out. We've got Vivek Saxena joining us this evening on World Today, former country representatives IUCN and presently working with the Haryana Forest Department joining us this evening, Forest Department Corporation joining us this evening on World Today. Good evening, welcome to World Today. Mr. Saxena, first things first, how when one looks at this particular edition of COP26 is COP meetings are always about promises, but this time do you see any likely outcomes? The first taking point, especially the key themes one speaks about, mobilizing finance, that seems to be somewhere sorted before the world leaders meet.
Yeah, good evening everyone, and you have raised a very valid point. all the COPs, before the COP meeting, we have a lot of discussion, lot of ambition and lot of hope. And this is also one of the watershed COP, especially in the context of ambition regarding further progress toward the Paris Agreement work program, and especially in the light of meeting the climate finance targets. Though in 2009, we have committed that $100 billion per year will be one of the target, and that still has not been achieved in any particular single year. And now is again the goalpost, expected goalpost shifting to 2023 with $100 billion. But again, if we see that those $100 billion, which were the estimates in 2009, and in 2023, when we are able to expecting it to achieve. But again, what we could have achieved with $100 billion in 2009 with the rising inflation, rise in the technology cost, and all these issues. So what will be achievable? Even otherwise, if we are able to get success in ensuring the climate finance on a sustainable basis, and also to the targeted countries, the type, availability of all this finance at the right time with proper support in terms of the technology and other actions, only then I think we can say that the expectation from the next COP, which is just beginning in the next 1 year, 1 week, we can have some sort of a success. And we hope that, I think this time, every COP we have a lot of hope. And again, we are hoping that this time COP, some of the key issues on which the discussions and deliberations will take place, in which climate finance is one of the very important aspect. I think this time we should make progress in this respect.
Okay, considering the fact that we've seen 25 COPs before, this time around, why do researchers or why do world leaders, are optimistic, or why are they optimistic as they hit, the drawing table or the drawing board once again, especially when it comes to the Glasgow edition?
Glasgow edition is important because at the same time, there is a lot of hope that Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, we will be able to make more success, and all the COPs, world leaders have all the hope, and it is one of the biggest forum when all the world leaders, they at least have a deliberations and look into the seriousness and recognize the threat which climate change is posing to the entire globe, entire humanity, and coming to a common consensus that there is a need to address all these issues. So that is one of the very important factor to bringing all the major players at a common platform, and especially now United States joining again, and some of the countries also committing towards the net zero target with respect of the climate, carbon neutral by the mid of this century. And we have to see, for meeting all these targets, what action at various levels have to be taken, and especially with India's stand or the developing countries' stand, that we have to ensure that common but differentiated responsibilities. So these are some very, very important issues based on which the developed countries, the expectations are too much. At the same time, the developing countries, they have challenged that they have to ensure the development also. They have to ensure that sufficient finance should be also be available, because they also have to ensure food security for this sustainable land use, the energy transition, all climate finance, cleaner technology availability. These are the very important issues which needs to be deliberated during the upcoming COP.
Climate finance, one of the most sticky issues, promises being made time and again, started way back in Cancun, repeated again, spoken about, we're going to follow it in Paris, but still not followed. When you look at before the meeting, there has been a promise not of meeting the target in 2022, but 2023. But, does that go well or augur well when one looks at the crisis before us?
Yeah, certainly the crisis is there, especially when we see in the globally the climate change related threats, especially loss of our biodiversity and also the land degradation. These three important conventions. And all these conventions need to have an appropriate synergy to tackle all these environmental challenges or the ecosystem services related which are getting degraded. At the same time, in the light of the COVID-related, post-COVID, this is one of the most important event after the recent the IUCN World Conservation Congress. So this itself sets an alarm. It should trigger the thought process of each and everyone, especially the developed countries, have to come at a common platform and ensure that finance and technology, if they are to be made available to tackle all these challenges for the better future which we aim at various conventions. So that is the biggest challenge, and for which I think we hope in the upcoming COP26 Glasgow climate meet, lot of expectations throughout the world, and I hope whatever expectations and deliberations take place during this meet, they get translated into action at the ground, bringing all the relevant stakeholders at a converging point. Every stakeholder need to take appropriate action at respective level, maybe the developed countries, developing countries. The energy transition is also a very, very important, because lot of coal-based power plants, they are responsible for a lot of CO2 emissions. But at the same time, how to ensure the renewable energy, or the energy which is the cleaner sources of energy, and especially another important aspect in which I think Indian Prime Minister, along with the UK counterpart, they will be launching that one sun, one grid and one world. So that will be important thing, because sun shines throughout the globe, at some part of the globe every time, and connecting the different countries through this one grid, international grid, it is really a very good initiative, and especially India also with the leader taking a lead during the 2015 climate Paris Agreement, when this International Solar Alliance that was launched, and it has also come up in a big way, and the respective countries' nationally determined contributions, that is also a very, very important factor, because they are the countries' own determined contributions towards which they have to make progress and meet their commitments. So that is a very, very important factor when we see in the totality that how to meet all those commitments of respective countries. And again, there is a question of haves and have-nots. So all those countries' nationally determined contributions which they have submitted to the UNFCCC, how are they going to achieve, how are they to be supported through various means? That is again a very, very important factor that will determine the achievement and attainability of the various targets, goals which we have set in.
Mr. Saxena, since you mentioned fossil fuels and the dependence on it, do you somewhere see the possibility, especially for developing countries, to get off from that, dependency, over dependency on fossil fuels, and maybe look at, new and renewable energy? India is one of the, 4 drivers, especially with the Solar Alliance, trying to find a way ahead. Since you mentioned one nation, one world, one grid, purely on those lines. But is there also a fear that developing countries have somewhere, with regards to, some kind of pledges, some kind of promises they're made, especially when it comes to funding for, say funding for coal, clearly being stopped, and, decisions with regards to that being taken, that could be one of the reasons that, maybe Russia has decided they don't want to attend this particular summit in Glasgow?
That is certainly a very, very challenging issue, because especially for the developing countries, they also at the same time with the development process, they also need energy sources. So that's why energy transition is a very, very important aspect. But at the same time, alternative energy scenarios, they must be available at an affordable cost. So presently, if we have you can say the source of energy from the coal, then how to substitute it with the alternative sources which are cleaner and also affordable. So that is certainly a very, very big challenge. And again, India has taken a lead in forming the International Solar Alliance. At the same time, the commitment under the nationally determined contribution to have 175 gigawatt from the renewable sources of energy, and raising its ambition to 450 gigawatt in future. So that is very important. And at the same time, with the population needs, the development needs, and in future also, then because of the energy needs are also increasing. At the same time, how to match all these energy requirements to meet with the cleaner sources of energy. So that support and contribution and commitment from the developed countries is also very, very important, especially when we talk in terms of the cleaner technologies used, and even if you have dependency of the coal-based power plant, then how to ensure that emissions are minimized, and at the same time, till we fully switch over to the other modes of energy transition, with the present use of all these coal-based power plants, how to ensure that their emissions are minimized and how to phase out them in a planned way so that without having any disruption to the development pathways or our thought process of future development scenario.
Mr. Saxena, looking at Australia's pledge, with regards to net zero emissions by 2050, how does one see it, considering the fact that, on the video wall I just showed that Australia is one of the largest purely in terms of, carbon dioxide emissions. It leads from the front, but when it comes to net zero target, it's talking about 2050. Do you somewhere feel they are somewhere late to join the party? Or, is Australia missing a trick or two before, things get to the discussion table?
250, the setting of the goal is really a very welcome initiative. And at the same time, how to achieve it, because if you see that, okay, I agree that at the per capita emission, which you just projected, that presently for the Australia, it is highest. But at the same time, we have to see that expectation that various countries need to commit about the, you can say, carbon neutral by mid of the century. So if any of the country comes with such a type of commitment or pledge or ambition level that they will meet it, it should be a welcome step. And we hope that whatever the pledge or commitment or target has been set in, especially by the Australia, the other countries also, whatever they commit or pledge, certainly they will make or take initiatives to meet those commitments. At the same time, other developing countries who have another different set of challenges, they will also try to take all these initiatives, but they need adequate support in terms of the technology as well as the climate finance and other related support. So they are also at par, because the challenges in the developing countries, when we see the population growth and the needs of the population of the developing countries, especially when we have to address the poverty related issues, the sustainable development related challenges, and at the same time we have to ensure that the natural resources, they are not degraded, because anthropogenic pressures also with the development pathways, they create a lot of degradation, or you can say a reduction in the ecosystem services. So that sustainable land use, or you can say landscape restoration, forest landscape restoration, afforestation, energy transition, and all these use of the cleaner sources of technology, the cleaner sources of drinking water, water resources, all those, they have a very, very important place in the future development pathways and scenario if we need to achieve all those commitments, especially when we talk of limiting the global temperature up to 1.5 degrees centigrade.
Okay, considering now, bringing India to the table, how would you look at India's stance going into COP26? And secondly, India has still not agreed to a net zero target. So, what will India bring to the table in Glasgow?
Certainly, India has a very important role to bring it at the table at the Glasgow, especially championing the cause of the developing countries. At this stage, setting a target of net zero, you should set a target only if you have certainly the target if you have are able to really meet with the target, and especially just declaring a target is not enough. We need to look at the scenario where you can have enough resources, enough support in terms of the finance pledge, as well as in terms of the technology availability, as well as the needs of the population for the development, energy needs and all. And you see that India's commitment for under the nationally determined contribution, they are very relevant and very important. But setting a target at this stage, I think the deliberations will take place, and I hope that certainly all the countries will come on a common platform to make advances and let the again, when we talk of the common but differentiated responsibilities, the countries who have more responsibility because of the past actions, they take a lead, and once they reflect or demonstrate their seriousness, I think the other developing countries will certainly follow if they also support the developing countries through adequate finance commitments. As you see that the commitments which were made in 2009 and is still in 2021, and the target has not been met. And those $100 billion, if you take into account the inflation and other factors, in 2022, I think that figure should be somewhere between $150 to $200 billion.
Okay. One quick word before I let you go. Do you somewhere feel, will that COVID-19 pandemic, somewhere affect this particular Glasgow meeting's outcome?
It is both way in a positive way. The positive way is we need to have a lesson learned from the COVID crisis, that how serious the climate change, loss of biodiversity and land degradation, and especially the loss of wildlife habitat, that can create havoc and bring entire world at a standstill. So at the same time, when entire world is facing challenge to meet the challenges related to their economic growth because of the COVID pandemic, lot of loss of job opportunities and economic growth, so that the priority is to bring back on track the economy. So at the same time, the finance for the meeting the climate change challenges, that will also be constrained to some extent. So here, the expectations after the this pandemic from this Glasgow summit, it is both positive aspect is need to learn lessons from the COVID crisis and adopt a pathway that is in harmony with nature.
Okay.
And that should also give us a lesson of what future we want, in what way we want to see to progress in all aspects of our sectors, the way we develop our cities, the way we develop our transport sector. At the same time, one of the aspects is some of the countries, because facing various challenges, they may not have sufficient finance and other things. So that expectation is to have the support from the global community and other countries for the those things. And I think these deliberations during the COP26, we should have very positive approach, and they will determine the future pathways to tackle the climate change crisis.
Well, great expectations there from COP26, and as Bhupendra Yadav put it, the upcoming COP26 should be a COP of action and implementation. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that when the world deliberates, the big nations of the world deliberate, they look at a better and a greener future for the future generations and for all of us. Thank you and appreciate you joining us, Mr. Vivek Saxena, this evening on World Today, giving us an insight especially into the big sticking point, the climate finance that's been taken care of, and an assurance of $100 billion by the year 2023, a target that's achievable and looks promising before the world leaders get down in Glasgow, and before that to the G20 summit, deliberating on what needs to be done to make this world a better place. Well, shifting focus, in a dramatic development, the volcano has become more active again on the Spanish island of La Palma, as the main cone of Cumbre Vieja volcano has partially collapsed, creating a new river of lava. The collapse has led to a large flow of lava gushing from the volcano early on Monday. Speaking on this, volcanologist Dominguez Ihadza has said that these are the moments of similar activities as it was the beginning of the eruption. Although it is early to know whether it would affect new areas, the volcanologist further added that there is still no data to indicate if it is decreasing.
We are now seeing moments of activity similar to those we had at the beginning of the eruption, with drastic increases in the emission of material, and we will have to see how it evolves. There is still a lot of seismic activity, and even if it stops, the eruption could continue. We already experienced this on the island of El Hierro 10 years ago, an eruption that lasted almost 5 months. So it is still too early to really know how long it could last. The duration we already know is being maintained. We will have to see if it lasts for a week or rather months.
The La Palma Cumbre Vieja volcano continued to spew lava and ash a day after a portion of its main cone collapsed. Residents of the island have weathered continuous volcanic and seismic activity since the eruption began on September 19. More than 7,000 people have had to evacuate their homes so far, while lava from the volcano has covered nearly 900 hectares of land, destroying 2,000 buildings and many banana plantations since this eruption began. Well, after 4 continuous years of extension, Egypt President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Monday announced the termination of nationwide state of emergency. Egypt imposed a state of emergency in April 2017 after deadly bombings of churches and had since routinely extended it at 3-month intervals despite an improved security situation. The state of emergency granted authorities sweeping powers to make arrests and crack down on what they call enemies of the state. Prominent Egyptian activist Hossam Bhagat welcomed the decision, saying it would stop the use of emergency state security codes, although it would not apply to some high-profile cases already referred to such codes. On to sports, in the men's T20 World Cup, Afghanistan won by 130 runs against Scotland at the Sharjah Cricket Stadium. Chasing a victory target of 191, Scotland got all out for 60 in 10.2 against Afghanistan. Opting to bat first after winning the toss, Afghanistan posted a score of 190 for 4 wickets with the help of Najibullah Zadran's 59 and Rahmanullah Gurbra's 46. For Scotland, Shafian Sharif picked up 2 wickets. The Afghan cricket team is playing their first match of the ICC Men's World T20 Cup. Scotland, meanwhile, qualified for the Super 12 stage after finishing atop their qualification group stage table, winning all 3 of their matches along the way. Afghan cricket fans came out to support their side as Afghanistan opened their World T20 campaign against Scotland in Sharjah, and many of the Afghan fans donned their national colours and carried the black, red and green flag that represented Afghanistan before most of the country was taken over by the Taliban in August. According to the fans, it was important to show their support in the face of dire difficulties the team had faced in the run-up to the World Cup following the Taliban takeover. Afghanistan have made a name for themselves in the game of cricket as a strong bowling attack and will rely on their spin trio of Captain Mohammad Nabi, Rashid Khan and Mujibur Rahman to restrict their opponents. Well, 2 new teams have been added to the Indian Premier League 2022 season. Apart from the 8 teams, 2 new teams are Lucknow and Ahmedabad. In the auction, BCCI announced successful bidders. Lucknow franchise goes to RPSG Ventures Limited for a whopping 7,090 crore rupees. And Aurelia Company Private Limited, that CVC Capital Partners, won the bid for Ahmedabad for a stunning 5,625 crore rupees. The final stages of preparations were underway for the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics with 100 days to go until the games begin. Despite concerns about the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, China has maintained that the world's biggest winter sporting event will take place on schedule from Feb 4th to Feb 20th next year. Beijing will also become the first city to host both the summer and winter games. Tickets for the games will be sold to spectators from mainland China only, while the unvaccinated athletes must spend 21 days in quarantine ahead of the games. This was after the Tokyo Games in July was held with empty stadiums due to COVID-19 precautions. Well, Beijing 2022 held the first day of its skeleton and bobsleigh test event competition with just over 100 days to go until the Winter Olympics. The 2-day test event at the National Sliding Center is an International Skeleton and Bobsleigh Federation sanctioned competition and an Olympic qualifying competition, the first international competition to take place at this venue. The recently completed National Sliding Center lies in the northwest suburbs of China's capital and is one of the several venues that has been specially constructed for the Games. Events include the women and men's skeleton, where athletes lie on a board and shoot down headfirst at speeds over 100 kilometers an hour. German athletes won the first prize in both categories. In total, 240 athletes from 23 countries, including Germany, the United States of America, South Korea and Canada, are scheduled to compete across the 2 days of competition over Monday and Tuesday. No Chinese athletes were registered to compete in this test event. India's double Olympic medalist PV Sindhu will look to iron her flaws when she competes at the French Open Super 750 badminton tournament. All this and lot more in Sports Wrap.
The WTA Tour has told its players that unvaccinated athletes will be able to take part in next year's Australian Open after undergoing 14 days of quarantine. In the email, the WTA said it wanted to clear up false and misleading information about the conditions players would face at the Australian Open. All players who arrived from overseas for the 2021 edition of the Australian Open had to undergo 2 weeks of quarantine, although most were allowed to leave their hotels to practice. The International Cricket Council handed out sanctions to Sri Lankan pacer Lahiru Kumara and Bangladesh opener Liton Das following their heated exchange during the 10th ICC T20 World Cup match between the two sides in Sharjah on Sunday. Kumara was fined 25% of his match fee while Das was fined 15% of his, and both were handed out demerit point for breaching the ICC's code of conduct during their Group 1 game of the Super 12 stage. All-rounder Ben Stokes has made himself available to play international cricket again and has been promptly added to England's Ashes touring party that will depart for Australia on November 4th. Stokes, who was carrying a left index finger fracture while on an indefinite break to look after his mental well-being, has been given all clear by his consultant and the ECB medical team to resume training following a second operation. India's double Olympic medalist PV Sindhu will look to iron out her flaws when she competes at the French Open Super 750 badminton tournament. Playing her first event in 2 months, Sindhu looked a bit sluggish at last week's Denmark Open, where she lost in the quarterfinals to face rising Korean Ahn Si-young. Andy Murray upset world number 1 Hubert Hurkacz to advance at the Erste Bank Open in Vienna. Murray's win is a blow to Hurkacz's chances to qualify for the ATP finals in the Turin next month as he battles for the final spot with Italy's Jannik Sinner. Murray failed to convert match point in the second set at 5-6 in the tie break, but had a strong showing in the third set to beat Hurkacz 6-4, 6-7, 6-3. The former world number 1 will next face Spain's Carlos Alcaraz after he sent Briton Dan Evans packing 6-4, 6-3.
Well, let's now take a look at some stories that are beyond headlines.
Japan's Princess Mako has officially left the imperial household and is now a commoner. She married her former college classmate Komuro Kei on Tuesday. Mako left the imperial family's Akasaka estate in Tokyo on Tuesday morning. Her parents, Crown Prince and Princess Akishino, and her younger sister Princess Kako sent her off. 2 pairs of bejeweled Mughal-era spectacles set with diamond and emerald lenses are expected to fetch up to $3.5 million each when they're auctioned in London on Wednesday. One pair, named Gate of Paradise, features emerald lenses set in diamond-mounted frames. The second, called Halo of Light, has diamond lenses set in diamond-mounted frames. The lenses are said to date from the 17th century, while the frames are from the 19th century. Both pairs are being offered at Sotheby's Arts of the Islamic World in India sale on Wednesday with a price estimate of £1.5 million to £2.5 million. Florida kicked off its stone crab harvest with a flurry of cracking and pounding as the annual stone crab claw eating contest crowned a new winner. Contestants competed to crack and eat 25 stone crab claws. 55-year-old Miami resident Juan Mallon reclaimed his champion title after finishing in 14 minutes 29 seconds. This was Mallon's 3rd win in the 10 years of the contest. Climate change is worrisome, but people have their own ways to tackle it. In Rio de Janeiro's Rocinha favela, a local project is promoting recycling by giving food donations in exchange for bottle caps which are used to build skateboards. The project, named Nalahe Designs, is a brainchild of 27-year-old Canadian mechanical engineer Ariane Raigani. Most of the plastic caps are donated by residents from Rocinha. Locals create recycling points in the favela where they collect, separate and clean the caps before handing them over to Nalahe Designs. The staff of the Skopje Zoo had a beautiful surprise recently as a baby marmoset, the size of a man's thumb, was born to the zoo's marmoset couple. The zoo authorities have been unable to determine the gender of the marmoset since the parents of the newly born are very protective of the child and don't let anyone touch it. Known as the smallest New World primate, a marmoset's body is on average 13 centimeters long. They are native to Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador and Peru and usually live in groups of 2 to 6 marmosets. Mexicans prepared for the traditional Day of the Dead celebrations by making colorful decorative altars. The commemoration of the dead, which combines pre-Columbian Aztec and Mayan rituals with Catholic rites, began at the home of the Villa Flores family too, who live in northern Mexico City. The altar of the Villa Flores set up at their family home has drawn attention due to its size, color and detail. The tradition has also helped to keep the family united. The Day of the Dead is observed on the 2nd of November. A museum of Iran's classic cars has opened in Tehran, showcasing an invaluable collection of vintage cars of historical importance from Qajar and Pahlavi periods. On display are cars such as a gold-plated limousine, a Rolls-Royce 4050 or Silver Ghost belonging to former Iranian king Ahmad Shah Qajar, a bulletproof Phantom 4, a royal carriage belonging to another former Iranian king Nasser al-Din Shah Qajar and other rare vehicles. Part of the exhibit is dedicated to super sports cars, including Lamborghini Miura and Lamborghini Countach, the Ferrari 500 Superfast, a Bizzarini and several Porsches. Some of the cars on show have been restored and renovated. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, let's now take a look at what else is making news across the world.
Political tension grows in Cuba as the Cuban president Miguel Díaz-Canel has warned the United States Embassy in Havana against fomenting protests by dissidents on the communist-run island. The warning came as the latest flashpoint between the longtime rivals ahead of fresh rallies slated for November 15th. Cuba has said that the planned demonstrations are illegal and blamed the United States for underwriting them, while the US has threatened Cuba with further sanctions if government jails protesters. The US Embassy in recent weeks has highlighted the cases on social media of several Cubans detained and jailed following the biggest anti-government protest on July 11th. In defense, the Cuban authorities said those arrested were guilty of crimes. In Nigeria, at least 18 worshippers were killed by gunmen who attacked a mosque in Niger State during early morning prayers on Monday. The attack took place in Mazakuka village in Mashegu local government area of the Niger State. The attackers also abducted around a dozen worshippers before escaping from the area. Niger Police Commissioner has said the attack was related to the conflict between the villagers and the Fulani herders. A week ago in northwest Sokoto state, assailants attacked a rural area, killing at least 40 people and displacing many more. The United States said on Monday that it has supported the European Union's engagement with Iran as coordinator of the lapsed 2015 Iran nuclear deal. But at the same time, the US also stressed that the ultimate destination to try to revive the accord was to resume talks in Vienna. The EU's top negotiator will meet his counterpart from Tehran this week in Brussels for talks on restarting negotiations over Iran's nuclear deal. World Today Desk, TD India.
Well, that's all we have time for in this edition of World Today. Thanks for watching. It's goodbye from me and my entire team. Bye-bye. Take care.